Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. In 1453, Mehmed II stood at a crossroad. As his empire already occupied vast areas of northern Africa and parts of Asia, the arrival at this crossroad signified his increasing dominance, as his empire had already spread to the east and now began to spread to the west, toward Europe. This crossroad was nothing new. It was a crossroad where several of his forefathers had stood before. First in 1394, then in 1411, next in 1422, and finally here in 1453, when this 21-year-old sultan had succeeded in doing what his predecessors could not. His time had come, and the time to strike was now. Mehmed not only stood at this crossroad, but he eventually made it his seat of power, replacing Edirne and transforming it into the capital city of his empire. These two decisions were to have major consequences that would affect the rest of the world for the next 300 years. What was the significance of this crossroad? Upon the decline of the Western Roman Empire in 33 AD, this crossroad remained the capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium, and named after its then conqueror, Emperor Constantine, as Constantinople. A crossroad that lay astride between two continents, that of Europe and Asia. A capital city that by 1453 had become one of the largest, most populated and wealthiest cities in the world. The capture of this crossroad by Mehmed II not only brought an end to the Byzantine Empire, which had lasted for more than a millennia, but it also cut off entry into the Black Sea, blocking off trading routes, including the Silk Roads to China and Indonesia, which were vital for the economic survival of European kingdoms. As Europe was on the outskirts of these established trade routes, the Italians, Spanish, Portuguese, and eventually the English and French began to search for new trading routes. Over the course of the next 300 years, 1450 to 1750, this collective search for alternative routes saw a dramatic increase in trade by sea that would bring a decline in trade routes by land, and in effect join both Western and Southern hemispheres, making trade a truly global activity in its reach and scope. It is at this point that historians often say that the European age of discovery began, an age that is often associated with technological and scientific advancement, cultural and intellectual enlightenment, and a change in people's diets, travel patterns and work habits. But more importantly for the purposes of this podcast, the European age of discovery would become symbolic of promoting the colonial narrative of European ownership of territories across the Americas, Canada, India, Australia, and eventually Africa, and the natural resources already known to and used by their indigenous populations. Sea trade and exploration allowed European kingdoms to gain world power, forming colonies across the previously mentioned territories. This enabled the transformation of labour, where a rigorous and relentless slave trade from the African continent began. the Spanish and Portuguese also adopted other labour systems, such as the mita and the encomienda, from previous indigenous cultures. And the rapid spread of Christianity happened in direct correlation to the Europeans' desire to profit from this explosion of trade and colonisation of what they perceived as newly discovered land masses. However, there is unequivocal evidence of Africans enjoying an age of discovery before the Europeans, such as Himilco, who lived during the 6th century BC. He was the first explorer to reach the shores of northwest Europe, going as far as England and Ireland. And Abu Bakari II, also known as Mansa Musa II, who reached the Americas almost 200 years before Columbus, and Juan Garrido, born in Congo in 1478, began his experiences as an explorer after being sold into enslavement. He settled in Mexico after exploring the Caribbean and Central Americas. In 1453, the continent of Africa was a vast array of large empirical civilizations, city-states, rural villages, nomads, and hunter-gatherers. But the greatest empire at this particular time was the Songhai in northwest Africa. Under the rule of the great Sunni Ali, a central government was formed, which brought control and stability to the cities of Jenne and Timbuktu. And as a result, trade and commerce with the Indian subcontinent and other parts of Asia enabled the empire to prosper. However, what happened to Songhai and others, such as the Kingdom of Congo, became prophetic of what would eventually happen to so many African settlements, cities and kingdoms after 1453, after coming into contact with Europeans. These settlements were either overridden and burned to the ground, or forced to engage in trading contracts for a range of goods such as textiles, weapons, ivory, and slaves. Many historians and scholars continue to debate as to whether colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade would have happened if it had not been for the need to find alternative routes to the east, due to the fall of Constantinople to the Turks and their 21-year-old sultan. Discussion centres on perspectives that slavery in this context was for economic reasons rather than because of racism. But let us remember that slavery had always existed in Africa and practiced in many kingdoms across the continent, and due to a range of contexts such as to repay a debt, being captured as the result of war, and becoming the chattel or property of a ruler or someone who had wealth. African slave hunters would regularly capture Africans from other tribes and transport them to ports along the coast for Europeans to carry them through the Middle Passage to a new world. Both slavery and racism are as old as civilization. But can you really separate the two? Is racism the cause of slavery, or is slavery the cause of racism? If slavery is viewed as a form of labour needed for economic prosperity and to maintain social order, then the perspective on someone being subhuman in order to achieve this doesn't make it right, but it is a moral one, citing that slavery is necessary for the economic good of society. Therefore, slavery is the cause of racism. However, if being viewed as subhuman and slavery is justification for being controlled or civilized by a superior being, then racism is the cause of slavery. What do you think? If you liked this podcast, then stay on this listening platform and check out my other podcast episodes related to this one, such as the original episode that this reprisal is based on, Constantinople 1453, a catalyst for European change, from the very first season. And from this, the current season, why not listen to the episodes Reimagining Our Representation and Ghana and the Chocolate Factory. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives. Once again, let's do the roll call. Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats. And also the publication of the latest 4 titles. If you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. And my latest newsletter is also available on the website storiestobetold.com. And as for our July promotion, it's a copy of The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, to mark the 26th anniversary of the end of the 99-year lease of Hong Kong as a British colony and its gradual assimilation back into mainland China. And speaking of promotions and giveaways, it's that time once again to announce a winner. So, without further delay, I would like to announce that July's winner is Carol. Many congratulations, Carol. A copy of The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong is on its way to you. And if you're interested in finding out more about the topic of the colonisation of Hong Kong, why not listen to my previous podcast episodes, Anyone for Tea, the colonisation of Hong Kong from the very first season, and last week's reprisal of this episode, Anyone for Tea, Reprisal. And if you'd like to purchase your own copy of The Journey's End, the link is in the show notes. Now, if you'd like to be registered on my email list, just visit storiestobetold.com and sign up, where you can opt in and receive not only your free samples of my first 4 titles, but also it's an opportunity to enter the draw for a chance to win a monthly giveaway. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And, as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next